If it weren't for the dog, no one would have known. No one would have known about the trapdoor, or the smell, or the cold silence trapped beneath the floorboards of Little Leaf Daycare. And no one, not a single soul, would have believed that behind the bright crayon murals, the sippy cups, and the cheerful songs, something so deeply wrong had been buried in plain sight for years. But Diesel knew. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. The sun rose late over Crestfield, Indiana, where folks still trusted their neighbors. Kids rode bikes to the corner store, and nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Officer James Nolan pulled up to Little Leaf Daycare expecting a routine welfare check. Some noise complaint from a nearby resident who said she'd heard screaming and scratching through the night. James didn't think much of it. Maybe a raccoon under the porch, maybe a tantrum gone too far. These things happened. But Diesel, his retired Marine canine partner, wasn't so casual. The old shepherd was slower now, stiff in the hips and grizzled in the face, but his instincts were still as sharp as the day they'd served together overseas. Diesel had saved James's life more than once, pulling him from burning rubble in Kandahar, warning him of tripwires in the Helmand province. After retirement, James had brought him home to Indiana, where the local department invited them to join a pilot community K-9 response unit. Mostly, it was ceremonial. Diesel made appearances at school events, took photos with kids. Everyone loved him. But this morning, the moment Diesel stepped through the daycare doors, something in him changed. The staff at Little Leaf greeted them kindly. Bright smiles, a clipboard of sign-in sheets, the smell of apple juice and floor cleaner. The place looked spotless, normal, exactly what a parent would hope to see when dropping off their toddler. But Diesel didn't care about the presentation. He walked straight past the staff, head low, nose twitching. "Sorry," James said, tightening the leash slightly. "He's just curious. This won't take long." The director, a woman in her mid-40s named Marlene, laughed softly. "We've had dogs visit before. They love the snack closet." But Diesel didn't go near the food. He made a beeline for the nap room. That's where it started. At first, it was just sniffing, slow circles near the edge of a colorful foam rug. Then, without warning, he began to dig. Claws scraped hard against the laminate floor. Diesel let out a low, urgent growl that made the hairs on James's neck stand up. It wasn't aggression, it was something else, like fear mixed with determination. James knelt down. "Diesel, what is it, boy?" The scratching grew more frenzied. The rug had shifted slightly, revealing an unusual seam in the floorboards. "Is there something under here?" James asked, turning toward Marlene, who had just stepped in with a confused look. "No," she said quickly. "It's probably just old glue. That area's always been uneven." James didn't answer. He looked at Diesel's face instead. The dog's eyes were locked on the floor. His body was tense, tail rigid, not playful, not curious. Trained alert, the kind that had saved lives. James stood up slowly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to take a closer look under this rug." Marlene hesitated. "Is that necessary? The kids are due back from morning circle time any second, and they get upset when the routine is broken." James didn't move. "Just give me a minute." He peeled back the rug, and there it was. A faint outline in the wood, a perfect square, no bigger than a dog crate. Someone had painted over it, sloppily. The floor didn't even match. The nails were old, rusted flat. His stomach dropped. Diesel barked once, sharply. Then again, louder. The sound echoed through the room, cutting through the cheery daycare music like a siren. A few kids peered nervously from the hall. A younger assistant, barely 20, stood frozen near the door, lips pale. James turned toward her. "You okay?" She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just startled. That dog's got a loud bark." She didn't make eye contact. James stood slowly, resting his hand on Diesel's back. The shepherd was now pawing at the square like he wanted to dig through it. "We're going to need to document this," James said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "If you're moved by stories of animal heroes and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where true courage has 4 paws." Marlene stepped in again, a little more forcefully this time. "Officer Nolan, I don't think this is appropriate during operating hours. We run a very clean, very compliant daycare here." James didn't answer. He knelt and tapped gently on the wooden panel. It was hollow. He tapped again. This time the assistant let out a soft gasp. "What's your name?" James asked, standing and turning to her directly. The girl froze. Me? Yes. Jenna. How long have you worked here, Jenna? 3 months? And have you ever heard anything strange in this room? She swallowed. Sometimes I thought I heard noises under the floor, like crying. But Marlene said it was just the plumbing. James looked back down. Plumbing didn't cry. He stepped outside the nap room to radio dispatch. Dispatch, this is Officer Nolan at Little Leaf Daycare. I've got a potential structural anomaly and a K-9 alert. Requesting backup and building inspection, possible code violation. Diesel barked again, this time deeper, sharper. James turned back to see one of the kids, a little boy no older than 4, walk up to Diesel and point to the floor. That's where the other kids went, the boy whispered. James crouched. What do you mean, buddy? The boy looked around, then leaned close. They go down there when they don't listen. The lady said they have to learn to be quiet. James felt his chest tighten. He stood up fast. Marlene tried to speak, but James cut her off. No one's leaving this building until I get a team in here. And I need access to every staff file, every floor plan, and the licensing documents. Now. She opened her mouth to protest, but Diesel growled again, long and low, not threatening, just sure that something was wrong. And so was James. The daycare had gone quiet. Too quiet. Officer James Nolan stood near the nap room doorway, clipboard in hand, waiting for backup. Diesel remained planted on the scratched-up spot on the floor like a sentry, his body still tense, ears alert, nose low to the ground. Across the room, Marlene sat stiffly on a blue plastic kiddie chair, arms crossed tight against her chest. She hadn't said much since James called for backup. Just kept looking at the floor, then away from it, like she was staring at something she wished she could forget. And maybe she had been. Jenna, the young assistant, was in the break room sipping orange juice from a paper cup. Her hands shook so hard James had offered to get her water. But she refused. She wouldn't look anyone in the eye either. James glanced at his watch. 8 minutes. That's how long it had been since he called in the alert. He'd asked dispatch for structural engineers, a child welfare officer, and another patrol unit for secure entry. They were on their way, but time felt like it had slowed to a crawl. Diesel let out a sudden grunt and resumed scratching, claws raking the old laminate. James looked down. The trapdoor outline had become even more visible now that the rug had been peeled back. What caught his eye next wasn't the trapdoor, though. It was something just beside it. A dull, reddish-brown smear near the edge of the mat. James bent down. What is that? He ran a gloved finger across the stain. It wasn't paint. It was old, tacky, and soaked into the grain of the wood. He sniffed it once, cautiously. Iron, rust, no blood. Old blood? He stood up fast. Marlene, he said, voice sharp now. Why is there blood in your nap room? She stiffened. There's no way that's blood. This is a daycare. Kids scrape knees. There are accidents. No accident left that pattern. James took a picture with his phone, then another with a forensic tag. Diesel barked sharply, once, as if in agreement. Marlene's voice wavered. Look, we've had issues in the past. Kids fall. Sometimes they hide cuts. I can't watch all of them every second. James narrowed his eyes. And what about that boy earlier? The one who said kids go down there when they don't listen. Marlene's face turned red. Kids have vivid imaginations. He's 4 years old. James didn't answer. He turned instead toward Jenna, who had just peeked her head into the hallway. Jenna, he said gently, can I talk to you for a moment? She hesitated, then stepped forward, paper cup still in hand. How long have you been here? He asked. 3 months, she replied, voice barely above a whisper. Did anyone ever show you what's under the floor? She shook her head. No, but I did hear things. What kind of things? Jenna's eyes welled with tears. Whimpering. Like a dog, but not. Like someone trying not to cry. I told Marlene, and she told me the plumbing knocks when the heat kicks in, but it didn't sound like pipes. James stepped closer, lowering his voice. Did you ever see children disappear from this place? Kids who didn't come back? Jenna looked down. I don't know, she said. They don't let us see the whole sign-in sheet. Sometimes a kid would be here on Monday and gone by Tuesday. I thought maybe they just unenrolled. I didn't want to ask too many questions. Marlene doesn't like that. James took a slow breath and nodded. Thank you, Jenna. That helps a lot. A loud knock came from the entrance. Finally, backup. 2 uniformed officers entered with a building inspector and a CPS agent in tow. James met them near the front desk and quickly briefed them on what Diesel had found, the visible bloodstain, and the strange comments from one of the children. The building inspector, an older man with a gray beard and clipboard, scratched his head. A hidden crawl space under a daycare? Not standard. I'll need to take a look. James led the group to the nap room. Diesel stepped back as the inspector knelt beside the trapdoor and tapped at the floor with a metal probe. Hollow, the inspector muttered. And look at the grain. This isn't factory flooring. Someone replaced this panel manually. He pried a corner loose with a crowbar. The sound that came out was a soft creak followed by a cold whoosh of air. The trapdoor lifted slowly, revealing a narrow wooden shaft beneath. It dropped about 6 feet straight down, with a wooden ladder bolted to one side. The air that rose up was stale and sour. Everyone recoiled slightly at the smell. James shone his flashlight down. A concrete floor, blank walls, a small pile of something in the far corner. "Jesus," one of the officers muttered. "There's a room under there." The CPS agent turned to Marlene. "You didn't disclose this space in your licensing paperwork. Why?" Marlene's lips trembled. "I didn't know it was there." Jenna let out a noise, half laugh, half sob. "She's lying. She always walked around that corner. She knew." James turned to Diesel. "You ready, partner?" Diesel barked once. James took a breath and descended the ladder with Diesel close behind. The flashlight beam swept slowly across the room. What they saw sent a chill up his spine. It wasn't just a storage area. There were old sleeping bags spread on the floor, child-sized, empty food wrappers, a broken toy, and in the far corner a dented aluminum bucket. The air smelled of urine and mold. James turned slowly, flashlight illuminating scratch marks on the wall, some shallow, some deep. He moved the beam toward the ceiling and spotted a tiny grate, a vent, just big enough to let in faint sounds from above. James muttered, "This wasn't a panic room, this was a holding cell." Diesel let out a low growl and padded toward the far end, sniffing near the back wall. He stopped and barked, short, urgent. James joined him. Behind a wooden panel partially rotted with moisture, he found a hidden compartment. Inside were 2 dolls, a sippy cup with a child's name written in faded Sharpie, and a small medical bracelet. He picked it up slowly, heart racing. It read, "Name Harper L. Dube, 11/18/2020. He swallowed hard. "This is recent." Back upstairs, the CPS agent and officers had begun questioning staff and quarantining the building. Parents were being contacted. Authorities were starting the process of cross-checking missing persons reports with the daycare's client list. James climbed back up, face pale, holding the bracelet in his hand. "Call in a forensic team," he said quietly, "and a trauma response unit." Diesel stayed beside him, his body still rigid, eyes locked on the hole in the floor. As James stood in the doorway watching emergency vehicles roll into the lot, one thought kept looping in his mind. How many kids cried down there and no one came? And how many times had Diesel, even in retirement, still known what no one else dared to believe? The news spread faster than wildfire. By noon, half the town had heard about the trapdoor under Little Leaf Daycare. Some thought it was just a forgotten storm shelter. Others whispered it was something far worse. James Nolan didn't deal in rumors. He dealt in evidence. And what he'd seen beneath that floor wasn't an accident or an oversight. It was deliberate. A sealed room, hidden from the world with bedding, wrappers, toys, and a medical bracelet that didn't belong to any child currently enrolled. By the time forensics arrived, he had already looped in 2 detectives, the CPS director for Marion County and a missing persons investigator from Indianapolis. They all had the same expression when they stepped into the nap room, like someone had kicked the bottom out of their stomachs. But it was Diesel's behavior that told the real story. The old shepherd wouldn't leave the trap door. He circled it like a soldier guarding a fallen comrade. Every so often he'd bark sharply, stare at the open hatch, and let out a low growl, as if daring someone, anyone, to go back down there. James knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Diesel didn't move. James reached out and scratched behind his ears. "You know something else, don't you?" That's when he remembered something. Something from the old days back in Kandahar. It was a village raid. They'd been clearing a compound, and Diesel had stopped cold in a hallway that looked clean and empty. Wouldn't budge. James had tugged the leash, urged him forward. But Diesel refused. Just stood frozen, ears forward. 10 seconds later, the floor collapsed. Beneath it, they found 2 women and a child, alive, dehydrated, trapped inside a chamber rigged with wires. Diesel had felt it then, and he was feeling it now. James stood and turned to the forensics lead, a woman named Mallory Jacobs. "There's something else down there," he said. "Something we didn't find." Mallory looked surprised. "You went through the whole chamber, right?" "Yeah," James said, "but not everything. Diesel thinks there's more." She shrugged, but nodded. "Then we go back in." They descended together, James, Mallory, and Diesel, wearing gloves, masks, and headlamps. The trapdoor had been widened to allow for easier access. The smell was worse now. With the air circulated, the musty, sour scent had deepened into something unmistakably human. The concrete room below still looked the same. Dolls, a dented bucket, old bedding. But now Mallory began scanning the walls with an infrared sensor while James watched Diesel. And Diesel moved with purpose. He walked to the far end where the wooden panel had been. But this time, he pressed his nose to the corner and began to bark, short, rhythmic, urgent. James moved quickly, kneeling beside the spot and rapping his knuckles against the wall. Hollow. He grabbed a pry bar from the gear bag and wedged it into the seam. It cracked slightly, splinters peeling back. Behind the panel was a narrow tunnel, no more than 4 feet tall, crawling space only. "Jesus," Mallory muttered. "That's not on any blueprint." James looked at her. "You staying topside?" "Hell no," she said, "and I'm right behind you." James got on his stomach and crawled in first. Diesel followed behind him like a shadow. The air was cold, dusty. The tunnel twisted once to the right, then opened into a smaller chamber. And that's when they saw it. A child's shoe. Small Velcro straps caked with dirt. Next to it was a cracked sippy cup, a pink headband, and a torn page from a children's book. Brown bear, what do you see?" James's throat tightened. He scanned the room, flashlight beam trembling slightly. The space was barely 10 feet wide. No lights, no bedding, just the relics of kids who shouldn't have been there. Then Diesel barked, loud. James whipped around. The dog was sniffing a large metal vent in the wall, disguised behind a wooden slat, same as before. Mallory climbed in behind them. "What is it?" James pointed to the vent. "Something's behind that." They worked fast. Using a crowbar and a flashlight, they pried the slat loose. The moment it came free, a gust of stale, warm air whooshed out. And something else. A sound. Faint but unmistakable. A cough. Then another. James and Mallory froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Mallory nodded. "That's a person." James leaned toward the vent. "Hello, can you hear me?" Nothing. Then, after a long silence, a tiny voice. "Help!" James's heart stopped. He turned back toward the tunnel. "We've got a live one." It took nearly 20 minutes to get a full emergency team down to the second chamber. Diesel refused to leave the tunnel. James had to leash him and pull him back when fire and rescue arrived with gear, oxygen, and stretchers. Inside the second chamber, hidden behind 2 layers of paneling and a false vent, they found her, a little girl, no older than 4, curled in a ball behind a pile of old blankets, barely conscious. Covered in dust, dehydration evident in her lips, her skin pale and clammy. James knelt beside her. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now." The girl opened her eyes slowly. "Doggy," she whispered. Diesel stepped forward and licked her cheek gently. And for the first time in what had probably been days, maybe weeks, she smiled. Back upstairs, chaos erupted in waves. Ambulances lined the curb. Detectives swarmed the property. Parents screamed. News vans pulled up to the front gates. CPS officers escorted children out one by one, shielding them from the flashing lights. Marlene was taken into custody after Jenna, shaking and tearful, told the full truth. "She made us keep quiet," Jenna said. "She said the child had special needs and her parents were dangerous. She said the girl needed protection. I didn't know she meant underground." Records soon confirmed the girl's name, Harper Lynn, age 4. Reported missing 6 days ago from a different town 30 miles away. Her mother had been begging local news for attention, but the case hadn't gained traction. Until now. When Harper was wheeled out on a stretcher, Diesel walked beside her. Camera flashes sparked. Someone shouted, "That dog! He's the one who found her!" James put his hand on Diesel's head. "He always finds them." That night, James sat alone on his front porch, Diesel at his feet. It had been the longest day of his life. Harper was safe, hydrated, under medical observation. And more questions were coming. Who built the rooms? Who else knew? Was Marlene working alone? But for now, all James could think about was Diesel. The dog who once saved him in a war zone had just saved a little girl from a nightmare beneath a daycare. He looked down at the old shepherd. "You're not done yet, are you?" Diesel looked up, tail thumping once. Somehow James knew. This story was far from over. James Nolan hadn't slept. Not even a minute. He sat in his living room at 3:12 a.m., a mug of untouched coffee in one hand, Diesel curled up at his feet. The old shepherd was finally resting, ears twitching in a dream. But James couldn't stop hearing the little girl's voice echoing in his head. "Help, doggy!" 6 days underground. And Harper Lynn still had the strength to smile when Diesel licked her cheek. That image stayed with James like a tattoo on his soul. He'd been on the force for nearly 15 years. He'd seen meth houses, domestic violence, fatal crashes. He'd carried bodies out of rivers, but nothing shook him like what they found under that daycare. The worst part? If Diesel hadn't clawed at that floor, no one would have looked. No one would have known. And somewhere in the mess of trauma, bloodstains, and hidden crawl spaces, James had this gnawing feeling. They still hadn't found everything. By sunrise, investigators had already started digging, not just into the physical building, but into records, permits, former employees. And that's when things started to stink worse than the basement air. Little Leaf Daycare had changed ownership 3 times in 12 years. The original owner, Francine Brewer, ran it from 2011 to 2016, then abruptly disappeared after a CPS investigation was opened into unexplained injuries involving 3 children. That case had quietly been closed, citing insufficient evidence. No charges filed. After Brewer vanished, a shell company bought the property. It was later leased to a woman named Annabelle Curran, who changed the name to Bright Days Early Learning and operated for 3 years before abruptly shutting down. No official reason listed. And then came Marlene. Marlene took over the building in 2020 under yet another LLC, changed the name to Little Leaf, painted the walls, brought in new staff, and left the basement out of every single license form. When detectives confronted her at county lockup, she claimed ignorance. "I didn't build the chamber. It was already there." "But you used it." Marlene didn't answer. James didn't buy it. Later that afternoon, he stood with Detective Elise Roby and a structural forensics team in the second chamber, where Harper had been rescued. The air still felt like it was holding its breath. Diesel sniffed the walls again, more subdued now, but still uneasy. "See this?" the lead forensics expert said, pointing to the left corner. "That concrete's newer than the rest. Different mix, less mold." James crouched down. "So someone sealed this off recently?" "Within the last year, I'd bet money on it." Detective Roby tapped a small chip of concrete with her pen. "You think there's something behind that wall?" "Could be," the forensics guy said. "Could be more space, or could just be to throw us off." Diesel padded towards the wall, sniffed twice, then sat. "That's his alert posture," James said. Roby looked over. "Even when he's not on duty?" "Always. When he sits like that, he's telling you something's there. He just doesn't know how to reach it." "Well," Roby said, straightening, "let's find out." It took the better part of 2 hours to get the wall broken open. They worked slowly to avoid damaging anything inside. When the final layer cracked, a foul gust of air poured out. This time, even the professionals flinched. They aimed a high-powered light through the hole. What they saw wasn't another room. It was a tunnel, long, narrow. Dirt walls reinforced with plywood beams, no more than 3 feet high. A passage that looked hand-dug and recent. The forensic tech turned to James. "This wasn't built years ago. That dirt's fresh," Roby muttered. "Where the hell does it go?" James turned to Diesel. "You ready?" Diesel stood. Flashlights, gloves, headlamps. James, Roby, and a backup officer entered the tunnel. Diesel went first, belly low, tail straight, ears sharp. It felt endless. 50 feet in, the air got colder. The tunnel forked once, then again. Whoever built it had done so with a purpose. And then they found something buried in the dirt. A lunchbox. It was metal, dented, and rusted at the hinges. James opened it slowly. Inside were drawings, childlike, crayon figures, names scrawled in shaky handwriting. One drawing showed a child in a box under the ground, with "no talking" written in red crayon above it. Another showed stick figures with black lines for mouths crossed out. The last drawing showed a dog, big ears, brown fur, and a girl holding its paw. Harper. James swallowed hard. Someone had been keeping the children down here long enough for them to draw pictures about it. The tunnel narrowed after that. Eventually, it ended in a wooden grate, leading up to another floorboard. James looked up at it. It's under another room. They took a GPS reading. It wasn't under the daycare anymore. It was under the building next door. The adjacent property had once been a dentist's office, then a church for 2 years. Now it stood abandoned. Windows boarded, lawn overgrown, locks rusted. James and Roby got a warrant within hours. When the team entered, the smell hit them first. Not rot, not mold, formaldehyde. The kind used to preserve specimens. They swept the ground floor quickly. Empty rooms, cracked linoleum, broken chairs. Then Diesel barked, once, then twice, at the back wall of what had once been the waiting area. Behind a sagging bookshelf, they found another door. Padlocked. A crowbar made short work of it. Inside was a room that looked like something out of a horror film. Shelves lined with storage tubs, old journals, cassette tapes, and a wall covered in Polaroids. All of children, faces blurred, names scrawled underneath. Some of the names matched missing persons reports from as far back as 2009. James took a step back, bile rising in his throat. Roby whispered, "This isn't just a rogue daycare, this is a trafficking ring." James felt cold all over. And Diesel, standing still in the center of the room, let out the softest whimper James had ever heard. Back at the precinct, the FBI was now fully involved. State police, task forces, news media. What started as a K-9 alert at a small-town daycare had now become a multi-agency investigation spanning 3 counties and nearly 15 years. James sat at his desk, staring at the files, photos, and timelines spreading across the wall. So many names, so many children. Some rescued, some still missing, and one German shepherd who had never stopped doing his job. He looked down at Diesel curled beside his chair, head on his paws, still alert even in sleep. "You knew," James whispered. "You always knew." And this time, people were finally listening. By the 5th day of the investigation, Officer James Nolan's office no longer looked like an office. It looked like a war room. Polaroids covered every inch of the bulletin board. Color-coded pushpins marked names, locations, dates, some crossed out, some circled. Maps were taped to the walls. A dry erase board held columns labeled known victims, unconfirmed names, suspected connections, locations yet to search. In the center of it all sat a cracked lunchbox filled with crayon drawings, and in the middle of the room, under the desk, lay Diesel, head between his paws, tail flicking slightly every time someone opened the door. James hadn't gone home in 3 days. Not really. He'd showered at the station, grabbed coffee from the diner across the street, kept a change of clothes in his trunk. There was no time for rest, not with the case growing larger every hour. What started as one sealed trapdoor had exploded into a statewide manhunt for a ring of people who'd been hiding children beneath buildings, falsifying daycare licenses, and disappearing them across jurisdictions. And now, someone was working hard to erase what little evidence they had left. It started with the files. Detective Elise Roby called James into the precinct's records room that morning. She looked furious. "Take a look," she said, slapping a folder onto the table. James flipped it open. "Little Leaf licensing packet," he said. "We already got this." "Wrong," Roby said. "We got a partial copy. This is the full version I pulled from the county archives in person." James scanned it again, and then he saw it. A signature on the final page. Annabelle Curran. "She was the one who ran the daycare before Marlene," James said, eyebrows rising. "Didn't she shut down in 2019? "Yup. But here's the twist. Curran didn't just run Little Leaf. Before that, she owned 2 other facilities in southern Indiana under different names. Both shut down after licensing issues. And get this, she was married to a man named Elijah Ross." James's blood turned cold. "Elijah Ross, the pastor who ran the old church next door?" "Bingo." James sat down slowly. "So you're telling me the daycare and the abandoned church were connected? Through a married couple?" "Not just that," Roby said, lowering her voice. "They owned both properties under a holding company called Golden Harvest Development. Sound familiar?" James blinked. "That's the name on the shell company that bought the daycare after Francine Brewer vanished." "Exactly. They've been using the same company to swap properties, change names, and move kids for over a decade." James stood up and started pacing. Every time CPS got close, they switched ownership, changed the name, painted the walls, moved the operation 2 blocks down. "And every time the records got a little thinner," Roby added. "Permits go missing, staff files disappear, CPS reports are mysteriously closed, and no one ever connects the dots." James looked toward the bulletin board where Harper Lynn's photo sat beneath a yellow sticky note that read, "Recovered alive." How many kids are still missing? 21, Roby said. From 2009 to now. Most under age 6. All had brief enrollments in facilities connected to Curran or Ross. James felt like the walls were closing in. He turned toward Diesel, who now sat up, ears alert. "You ready for one more?" he asked quietly. Diesel wagged his tail once. They drove out to the county records annex, an ugly beige building that smelled like old paper and burned coffee. A contact from the mayor's office had called James that morning to say something strange was going on. When they arrived, the clerk at the front desk waved them back without hesitation. "I didn't want to say this over the phone," she said, "but someone came in yesterday with a badge, said they were from CPS, and requested all licensing files for Golden Harvest properties. I thought it was legit, but something didn't feel right." James leaned in. "You get a name?" "Just initials." He signed the visitor log as ER, but I've already checked. There's no active CPS investigator with those initials in this county. "Did he take anything?" "Yeah. 3 boxes of files, including old facility records from 2014 and 2015. That includes a building in New Harmony, one we never connected until now." James cursed under his breath. They were getting too close. Someone inside the system was helping wipe the trail. Back at the station, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Jenna, the daycare assistant who'd spoken up, had remembered something she thought was irrelevant. She texted James late that night. "I remembered something. I think one of the kids left something in the toy chest. A name tag or bracelet. They told me never to open that chest, but I think it might still be there." James and Roby returned to Little Leaf after hours. The building was now an active crime scene, sealed off and guarded, but they had clearance. The toy chest sat under the window in the nap room, innocent-looking, bright yellow with a rainbow painted on the side. James pried it open. Toys, old stuffed animals, a broken tambourine, and tucked beneath a stack of books, a laminated hospital wristband. He held it up. Name Caden M. Dob 203-2017, admit date 05/12/2022. James frowned. Caden wasn't on any of the daycare rolls. Roby checked her phone. "There's a Caden Mendez reported missing in Evansville last year. 5 years old. Last seen leaving daycare with a female guardian. Case went cold." James turned the wristband over. Scrawled on the back in crayon, "Doggy will find us." He blinked hard, throat tightening. "Caden believed someone was coming," Roby said softly. "That's why he left this," James whispered, and Diesel did. It all began to click. The tunnels. The rotation of buildings. The shell companies. Every move was carefully designed to stay one step ahead. Children were shuffled like shadows. Records deleted. Paper trails burned. But not anymore. Now they had connections, names, evidence. And they had a German shepherd with a nose for truth. Back at the station, James stood in front of the bulletin board and added a new sticky note under Caden's photo. Believed alive. Search active. Then he looked down at Diesel. "You didn't just find Harper," he said. "You gave every one of those kids a second chance." And deep down, James knew. The final piece of this nightmare was about to come to light. The first arrest came at 6:17 a.m. Elijah Ross, former pastor, daycare financier, and co-owner of multiple Golden Harvest properties, was pulled from a rental cabin in the Kentucky woods. He'd grown out his beard and shaved his head. Authorities found 2 fake IDs, an encrypted laptop, and a duffel bag filled with burner phones and cash. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. By the time James Nolan saw the news flash on the precinct TV, federal agents were already knocking on doors across 3 states. Annabelle Curran was arrested at a private home in Terre Haute. 2 other employees from Bright Days Early Learning turned themselves in once the charges dropped, and slowly, painfully, the web began to unravel. Golden Harvest wasn't just a shell company. It was a front. Over a dozen buildings across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky had been used as temporary re-education chambers for children deemed unmanageable. Some were kids with autism or speech delays. Some had been labeled defiant or slow learners. Others, no one really knew how they ended up there. But James knew this. They were all victims, and none of it would have come to light without Diesel. Harper Lynn was back with her mother now. The reunion had been quiet, off-camera, at a secure trauma recovery center outside Indianapolis. Her mother, Stephanie, held her like she never wanted to let go again. James watched from a distance, hand resting on Diesel's back. She asks about him every morning, Stephanie had told him. She say anything else? James asked gently. Stephanie nodded. She says she always knew he'd find her. In the weeks that followed, Crestfield transformed. The daycare building was demolished by court order. Its foundation dug up, its pieces sent for forensic review. A plaque now stands on the site, in honor of the children found and those still missing. The church next door was turned into a multi-agency child welfare center, funded by donations from all over the country. Volunteers came in from Chicago, Columbus, and Louisville to help create therapy rooms, legal aid desks, and a memorial hallway for survivors. And Diesel became a legend. Local kids painted murals of him downtown. A bakery in town started selling hero dog biscuits in his honor. One teacher even wrote a children's book titled The Dog Who Found the Light. But the best recognition came 1 month later, on a warm evening at the Crestfield Civic Center. James stood in the auditorium's wings, fixing his tie. He hated events like this, public speeches, applause, cameras. He was a patrol cop at heart. But tonight wasn't about him. It was about Diesel. The MC, a well-known news anchor from Indianapolis, stood at the podium in front of hundreds of parents, officials, survivors, and rescue workers. And now, she said, it is our great honor to present the Silver Paw Medal for Distinguished Animal Service, the first of its kind, to a canine who not only served his country, but came out of retirement to save the lives of innocent children here in Crestfield. The crowd stood as Diesel trotted onto the stage beside James, wearing his polished vest and ID tag. He blinked into the lights but didn't flinch. James accepted the medal on his behalf. He leaned into the microphone. I've worked with Diesel for over a decade. He's saved me, protected strangers, and sensed danger before anyone else could smell it. But this was something different. He heard what none of us wanted to believe, and he wouldn't stop until we listened. The applause was thunderous. James looked down at Diesel, who wagged his tail once. It was all the thanks he needed. After the ceremony, James walked Diesel out to the edge of the Civic Center lawn. A breeze blew through the trees, and laughter echoed from families nearby. Kids ran in the grass. Parents snapped photos near the memorial wall. It almost felt like peace. He crouched beside Diesel and scratched under his chin. You did good, partner, real good. Diesel nudged James's chest with his nose, then settled beside him in the grass. James leaned back and stared at the stars overhead. The question he'd been avoiding floated into his mind. What now? The case was technically over. The ring dismantled. The properties seized. The victims, those who could be found, were safe. But trauma didn't end with arrests. Justice didn't erase memories. There would always be more work to do. Still, for the first time in a long while, James allowed himself to breathe, to hope, to believe that one dog really could change the course of dozens of lives. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. It's easy to overlook the heroes among us, especially the four-legged ones. But Diesel proved that courage doesn't retire, that instinct and loyalty can save lives, and that even in the darkest places, someone is always listening. What do you think? Should retired service dogs be allowed to serve again in community programs? Or do they deserve peace after years of duty? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more real stories of bravery, healing, and the incredible bond between humans and animals.